No-till gardens. This was in front of the greenhouse. I think I took this picture in 2018 or 2019. I grew corn, and I grew, here's tomatoes, and I had peanuts mixed in. And then I had carrots growing here, and I allowed them to go to seed because I collected the seed. And I had all the vegetables I had mixed together, including flowers. There are certain kinds of flowers which repel insects, so I grow them together. Also, it's pretty. It was in the greenhouse, that first greenhouse that's there. I always kept the soil covered with a thick layer of mulch, and at that time, I could put in a shovel or a fork, and it would just go down. It would just go down and down because the soil became so soft. Because it doesn't rain in the greenhouse, I kept a fairly good level of humidity, and these insects increased. These are not insects. These pill bugs increased a lot, and they made the soil so puffy, so puffy. Now, they did eat seeds when I planted the seeds, but if I planted a baby plant, they did not bother the plant. The methods that I have used with no-till is using dead plants and also paper. The reason I use paper is because we have paper. In your situation, you might have a different resource available to you, maybe rice husk, or I don't know what you have, but you have to use the resources that are available to you. If, because of people throwing away garbage, you have cardboard, you can use cardboard. Be smart. Figure out what you can get for free or really cheap and use that. So I used paper mulch, and I used dead plant material. This protected the soil from water and wind erosion. It prevented the weeds, not 100%, because again, I need some weeds so I can cut them and use them for mulching anyway. So it's not bad. It preserved the soil moisture, so if I have uncovered soil, the soil dries. But if I cover it, the soil moisture stays there. The plant mulch, because underneath all of the spaces formed because of the things living in the soil, the water easily passed through into the soil. The paper mulch, not so much. The water only went in some places. The feed sacks, also these paper sacks, so much like mushroom roots. The mycorrhizal hyphae is a fancy way to say mushroom roots. They were growing in that paper so much. So those are also extremely helpful for feeding plants. Most mushroom type things, fungus, they make a relationship with a plant, and they actually connect to the plant's root, and they will get water and they will get minerals where the plant cannot reach, and they will give it to the plant because the plant is making sugar using the sunlight, and the plant's giving the sugar then to the fungus root. This is an amazing and exciting relationship. Recently, even some scientists discovered that these relationships are, there's a plant, it has roots, and then it has the fungus root connecting, and then that fungus root might connect to another plant. Sometimes this plant and this plant can be friends with each other, and if this plant is having a hard time, maybe it got covered, this plant will send some sugar or something to the other plant. They found this amongst forest trees, so that was very interesting as well. And then if you cover the soil, you get more biodiversity. I haven't been here in a while, but if you even look yourself, uncovered soil or covered soil, if you uncover that covered soil and look, there's something living there. More things live if the soil is covered. I used this method. It was okay, but I'm sharing with you so that you can learn from my mistakes. I covered here with paper, and then I had rice straw in the aisleway, and then I used rocks to keep the paper from flying away. But when the sun shined on the paper, the plants got stressed because it was too bright, and so later I had to cover up the paper so that the plants could grow better. If plants get too much sunlight, they get stressed out. And also the water would go through, like in these areas, but it wouldn't penetrate the paper very well because the sacks are 4 layers of paper. Plant mulch with no paper. was really good, but I needed so much plant mulch. And sometimes I don't have enough plants. Like I have to cut and cut and cut and cut and cut, right? So it was the best, but I needed so many plants. So that's why I like to use it together with paper. The soil recovery, disease resistance is a big problem in Korea because of peppers getting diseases. But if you cover the soil, it prevents the peppers from getting the disease because it comes from the soil, and the rain falls on the soil, and the soil bounces and sticks to the leaf, and then the disease affects the pepper plant. So covering the soil helps with preventing those diseases. Yeah.
With the covering, is it okay with any kind of set plants?
Yeah, I use anything. However, one time I used rose bushes, and then later I was walking there, and there were thorns. So really thorny plants, probably not a good idea. But otherwise, yeah.
I understand. How to put water, split water if there is paper?
Well, you make a hole where you plant the plant in, right? So there's a hole in the paper there. You just put the water in there. Yeah. Even when it rains, somehow the water will go between the papers. But I do notice that it's not as perfect as if you just use plant material. So sometimes I'll put the papers, like, let's say I have plants growing in this. Gotta be more careful. Sometimes if I have plants growing here, like this, but here's just my walking path. So sometimes I'll take the papers and I'll put them like this in the walking path. So then there's a space right under the plants where I don't have paper. Then the water is going there, and then the paper is in this non-used area. I mean, you're walking there, but you're not planting something there. So then the weeds aren't growing here. Then when you weed, you only have to weed this small area and not the whole area. So this is a before and after photo. This was, I think I took this picture in April, and I took this picture in May. Here, I pulled out the weeds, or I cut the weeds. Sometimes I leave the root of the weed in the ground because that living root is good. And then I just cut again and again and again. Then I get more and more plant material mulch. So I cut or I pulled out the weeds. I covered the surface of the soil. Then I planted watermelons here. And the watermelon vines covered everything, like this. So in 1 month, it really grew up really well. But the walking path, I don't want to continuously having to get the weeds out of there, so I just covered it in the paper bags. And then here, you can see the paper is there, but it just gets covered up. And then after 3 months, the paper decomposes and turns into soil. Because there's many living things in the soil and they eat the paper.
But what I see here is the paper has colors and it may have inks, and it does not affect the
So I looked up the types of inks, right? There's inks which are lead-based inks, and then inks which are soybean-based inks. And as far as I can tell, in animal feed, it's soybean-based, at least in Korea. But I did research about that. There's different kinds of inks, but it didn't seem to be making a problem. So over time, if it was a lead-based ink, you might get a little more lead in the soil, which is obviously a bad thing. Yeah.
Because sometimes, the cardboard, they have this printed bright color.
So I probably wouldn't use the shiny paper.
Yeah.
This is not shiny paper. It's more like newspaper, right? So it's
like the one where is the feed.
yeah, that's the same. It's the same. This is another method I used. So here I put paper and then I put plant material on top. So then I planted these tomato plants into a hole, and then they grew up. Because in the summer the weeds grow up so much, this prevents weeds from going up while the plants are getting established. But then when the weather becomes hot, then the paper and plant material does decompose, and then you do have to do some weeding. But it really makes less weeding when the plants are when they start. So this is a great way to establish the crop. And then once the plant is very large, let's say you have a tomato plant that's this big. If there's a weed this tall under the tomato plant, is that going to really hurt the tomato plant? No. Right? But if you have a tomato plant that's this big and the weed is this big, yeah, the weed is going to hurt the tomato plant. So sometimes you can make a balance of to what extent, how much are you going to pull out every weed? Because the more different living things in the soil, the better. But you don't want the weeds to win over your vegetables. And then this was, I had sweet potatoes. After you dig sweet potatoes, right, the ground it's not plowed, but it's dug up, right? So I took the ground again and I made it into the hill shape again. It was still a little bit hill shape remaining, but you know, you dig and there's holes, right? So I made the hill shape again. I put the manure on the surface of the soil in the fall, and then I covered it with the dead plant mulch. I always put manure in the fall, and then I cover it. This is because if you think about the natural cycle, when does nature fertilize itself? In the fall. The leaves fall down, then in the winter, slowly the leaves are decomposing. Then in the spring, the plant roots are pulling in the nutrients from the dead, decomposed leaves, and they're making new leaves. So I usually try to fertilize in the fall. So this is in the fall. I put the paper here, and then I covered everything. And then it just slowly decomposes all winter, and in the spring, it's just ready to plant. Of course, your seasons are different, but you can adjust depending on your own needs. So again, I said follow the natural pattern of your own climate. When is the resting season for the ground? What is the growing season for the ground? When is the wet season? And make your own farming method match how your seasons are in your place. So I always fertilize mulch in fall, plant in the spring, like I said earlier. So this is after we fertilized and mulched here. So here we had garlics and onions. In the winter time, it's cold, and if you leave the soil uncovered, the wind blows, some soil goes away. The small onion and garlic plants, they get very they turn yellow and kind of burned by the cold. So I always, before I plant garlics and onions, I plant all of the onions and garlics, then I cover with a thick layer of this dead plants. Then it stays warm under there. And then in the fall, that shoot comes up well because it's protected by the dead plants. Then it grows a little bit in the winter, but not much. And in the spring, it's ready to go. Because it had that protection, its roots could carefully grow down there in the wintertime. This is really good until May, and then in this climate, it begins to rain, and at that time, the weeds grow a lot. So we have to mulch again, or we have to just, we harvest, and then it grows high weeds, and then I plant again in the fall. So the resting season is from sometimes June, July, until middle of August. We cut, we lay it down, and then we plant the cabbages in this climate. This is a method which I actually learned from a person who came here to volunteer. She always cut the weeds. They grow up like this, right? She cut them right here. And when you cut the top of the weed, then you lay the dead weed on the surface of the ground. And the roots and the top, they like to match each other. So if you have a top that's this big, the roots are this big. If you grows up, it becomes like this. You cut this off with grasses, the bottom parts of the roots also die. So then that dead root becomes more organic matter for the soil, which is more fertilization for the soil. Then it grows back, and you cut and you grow it back, cut and you grow it back. You're getting free fertilizer. This is what we want. Free fertilizer, so you don't have to go and get it from somewhere. It's there. So she started doing this, and she was using this method in this part of the field, and it seemed to be working very well, except in the most rainy part of the rainy season, the plants grew really, really fast, and so I was not able to cut at the same speed that the plants were growing. So you have to think about your individual needs, but this is, I think, a pretty good method when the plants are growing at a moderate speed. With soft plants, if you cut it, you can have maybe a vine. You can put it in water. It decomposes in the water, and you can take that water and you can use it as liquid fertilizer. And so if you have a young plant you want to grow very fast, you can use that. You can also take like from your dead animals, any part you don't eat, put it in the water. It becomes really bad smelling liquid. Put that on your plants. It grows really fast.
About the previous method, how often do we cut the plant so that we get this fertilizing?
Depending on the season. So in the fall, things grow slowly. In the spring, things go fast. In the rainy season, things grow very fast. So if you have a situation where it's growing too fast and you can't manage it, you might want to pull it out. But if you have a situation where you can manage it, you can keep cutting and laying it down. Some farmers, they never pull it out, but I think sometimes that can be impractical. So I think adjust.